Charles Bennett lived a life many people dreamed of. He owned big houses, expensive cars, and had more money than he could ever spend. But his story wasn't always like this. Charles grew up poor in a small town called Willow Creek. His family struggled to make ends meet, and from a young age he promised himself that one day things would change, and they did. Through hard work, smart decisions, and maybe even some luck, Charles became a millionaire before he turned 35. But success came with its own problems. Charles worked long hours, traveled all over the world, and spent most of his time thinking about business. He didn't have much room in his life for relationships or family. Still, there was one person who managed to break through his tough exterior: Laura. She was kind, patient, and saw something in Charles that others missed. They met at a charity event in Willow Creek where Laura volunteered her time helping kids learn to read. Charles admired how caring she was, and soon they started dating. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Laura brought warmth into Charles's life, making him feel less lonely. But then something happened that changed everything. One evening after dinner at Laura's apartment, she looked at him nervously and said, "There's something I need to tell you." Her voice trembled as she explained that she was pregnant with twins. At first, Charles felt shocked. Then, panic set in. Twins meant double the responsibility, double the cost, and double the chaos. It was too much for him to handle. Instead of talking to Laura about it, Charles shut down. Over the next few weeks, he avoided her calls and canceled plans. He told himself that he couldn't raise children. Not now. Not ever. His mind raced with excuses. He was too busy, too focused on his career, too selfish. Deep down, though, he knew the real reason. He was scared. Scared of failing, scared of being tied down, and scared of losing the freedom he cherished so much. The days passed quickly, and soon, the babies were born. Laura called Charles late one night, asking him to come to the hospital. She sounded tired but happy. Charles hesitated. He wanted to run away, but part of him felt guilty ignoring her completely. So, reluctantly, he went. When he arrived, Laura handed him 2 tiny bundles wrapped in soft blankets. One was a boy, the other a girl. Their faces were peaceful, their eyes closed as they slept. For a moment, Charles felt something stir inside him, a flicker of love, of connection. But just as quickly, fear took over. That night, Charles made a decision that would haunt him forever. After leaving the hospital, he convinced himself that keeping the babies wasn't an option. He thought about putting them up for adoption, but even that felt too risky. What if someone found out? What if his reputation suffered? No, he decided, he needed to do something drastic, something final. Using a car borrowed under a fake name, Charles drove to a quiet spot near Willow River. It was late, and the area was deserted. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the gentle flow of water. Clutching the bundles tightly, Charles stepped closer to the riverbank. His heart pounded in his chest. Was he really going to do this? Could he abandon his own flesh and blood? He tried to justify his actions. Someone will find them, he thought. Someone kind and loving who can give them a better life than I ever could. But no matter how hard he tried, the weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. Tears filled his eyes as he placed the bundles carefully near the edge of the water. Then, without looking back, he got into his car and drove away, as Millionaire. The distance between him and the river grew. Charles felt a strange mix of relief and horror. Relief because he wouldn't have to deal with the responsibility of raising children. Horror because he had just committed an act he could never undo. He tried to push the memory out of his mind, focusing instead on his business and his wealth. But every now and then, especially during quiet moments, the image of those 2 bundles haunted him. Meanwhile, back at the river, fate intervened. A fisherman passing by noticed the bundles and immediately called the authorities. The babies were rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed they were healthy despite their ordeal. News of the abandoned infants spread quickly through Willow Creek, sparking outrage and sadness among the townspeople. Everyone wondered who could do such a thing and why. Laura, still recovering from childbirth, woke up the next morning expecting to see Charles waiting for her. Instead, she found an empty chair beside her bed. Confused and worried, she asked the nurses if anyone had visited during the night. They shook their heads. Hours later, police officers arrived to ask her questions about the missing babies. Laura broke down in tears, unable to believe what had happened. She begged them to find her children, promising to do whatever it took to bring them home, but, despite their best efforts, the investigation hit a dead end. There were no witnesses, no evidence pointing to Charles or anyone else. Eventually, the case went cold, and Laura disappeared from Willow Creek shortly afterward. Some said she moved, away to start fresh. Others whispered that she couldn't bear to stay in a place that reminded her of her loss. Years passed, and Charles continued building his empire. On the surface, he appeared successful and content. But beneath the smiles and handshakes lay a man burdened by guilt. He often thought about the babies, wondering if they were alive and well. Had someone adopted them? Were they happy? Or had they suffered because of his selfishness? These questions lingered in the back of his mind, unresolved and painful. In another part of the country, far from Willow Creek, two siblings named Ethan and Emily grew up unaware of their true origins. Raised by a loving adoptive mother named Patricia, they led ordinary lives filled with school, friends, and dreams for the future. Little did they know, their journey to uncover the truth about their past would eventually lead them straight to Charles and force him to confront the consequences of his actions 18 years earlier. Ethan and Emily grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Oakmont, a city far from Willow Creek. Their adoptive mother, Patricia, worked long hours as a waitress to provide for them, but she always made sure they felt loved. Though money was tight, Patricia gave her children everything she could: support, encouragement, and a safe place to call home. Ethan and Emily were inseparable, sharing not only a bedroom but also dreams, fears, and secrets. From an early age, it was clear that Ethan had a knack for technology. He spent hours taking apart old gadgets to see how they worked. By the time he was 12, he had built his first remote-controlled car using spare parts he found at garage sales. His teachers often praised his creativity and problem-solving skills, predicting he'd one day become an engineer or inventor. Ethan dreamed of creating machines that could help people, robots to assist the elderly, devices to clean polluted rivers, or tools to make life easier for those in need. Emily, on the other hand, had a different kind of talent. She loved words. Whether it was writing stories, composing poems, or crafting articles for her school newspaper, Emily had a way of expressing herself that captivated everyone who read her work. Her favorite topic was social justice. She wrote about issues like homelessness, education, inequality, and environmental protection, hoping to inspire change in her community. While Ethan looked to the future with inventions, Emily sought to understand the present and challenge its injustices. Despite their differences, the twins shared a deep connection. They supported each other through thick and thin, whether it was helping Ethan debug a malfunctioning circuit board or cheering Emily on when she won an essay contest. Their bond was unbreakable, even though neither of them knew much about their past. One rainy Saturday afternoon, when Ethan was 17 and Emily 16, curiosity got the better of them. Patricia had gone to work, leaving the house empty, except for the two of them. Bored and restless, Emily suggested exploring the attic, a place they rarely ventured into. Dusty boxes lined the walls, filled with old clothes, photo albums, and forgotten trinkets. As they rummaged through the items, Emily stumbled upon something unusual: a small cardboard box labeled adoption papers. Her heart skipped a beat. Adoption wasn't a secret in their household. Patricia had told them years ago that she had adopted them as babies, but she never went into detail, saying only that they had been found abandoned near a river and brought to her through the foster car system. Now, holding the box in her hands, Emily felt a surge of excitement and apprehension. What if there were answers inside? Answers about who they really were? Ethan noticed the look on her face and came over to see what she had found. Together, they opened the box. Inside were faded documents, handwritten notes, and a few photographs. One document caught their attention immediately. It was an official record detailing their discovery near Willow River. According to the paper, two newborns, had been found wrapped in blankets by a fisherman late one night. There were no names listed, no clues about their biological parents, just a vague mention of unknown origins. Emily's eyes widened as she read aloud. "They found us near a river? That's all it says?" Ethan frowned, flipping through the other papers. "There's nothing here about our real parents. No names, no addresses, nothing." Determined to learn more, Emily decided to confront Patricia when she returned home. That evening after dinner, she sat down with her mom and asked point blank, "Why didn't you tell us we were found near a river? Why didn't you say anything about where we came from?" Patricia sighed, looking both surprised and guilty. "I didn't think it mattered," she admitted softly. "You're my kids no matter what. I wanted you to grow up feeling safe and loved, not wondering about things I couldn't explain." "But did anyone try to find our parents?" Ethan pressed. Patricia hesitated before answering. "The police investigated, but they couldn't find anyone. It was like, whoever left you didn't want to be found." The revelation left Ethan and Emily stunned. For days afterward, they couldn't stop thinking about their mysterious beginnings. Who were their biological parents? Why had they been abandoned? And most importantly, could they ever find out the truth? Emily became obsessed with solving the mystery. She spent hours online researching adoption cases, reading forums, and contacting organizations that specialized in helping people trace their roots. Meanwhile, Ethan used his technical skills to dig deeper. He created spreadsheets, cross-referenced data, and even hacked into public records databases, though he promised Emily he wouldn't get into trouble. Slowly, they began piecing together fragments of information. One breakthrough came when Emily discovered an old news article from Willow Creek. It described the discovery of 2 abandoned infants near Willow River 18 years ago. The story mentioned that a local woman named Laura had gone missing around the same time. Intrigued, Emily dug further and found records indicating Laura had been admitted to a psychiatric facility shortly after giving birth. Could she be their mother? And if so, what had happened to her? As they uncovered more details, Ethan and Emily realized their search was leading them closer to Willow Creek. They decided to visit the town themselves, hoping to find answers. Patricia reluctantly agreed to let them go, trusting that they would stay safe. Before leaving, Emily hugged her tightly. "We're doing this for us," she said, "but no matter what we find, you'll always be our mom." The trip to Willow Creek was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. As they drove into the small town, they noticed how different it was from Oakmost. The streets were quieter, the buildings older, and the pace of life slower. They checked into a motel and began their investigation right away. Their first stop was the library, where they scoured old newspapers and archives. They learned that Charles Bennett, a wealthy businessman, had lived in Willow Creek during the time of their abandonment. Some articles hinted at rumors linking him to Laura, though nothing concrete was ever proven. Ethan and Emily exchanged glances, sensing they were onto something big. Next, they visited the psychiatric facility where Laura had reportedly stayed. The building looked worn and neglected, its windows boarded up. A caretaker greeted them cautiously and confirmed that Laura had indeed been a patient there years ago. However, she had passed away several years earlier due to complications from her condition. Heartbroken but determined, Ethan and Emily asked if they could see any of her belongings. To their surprise, the caretaker handed them a dusty shoebox, containing letters Laura had written but never sent. Back at the motel, they carefully opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters addressed to Charles and signed Laura. Reading them was like stepping into another world. Laura wrote about her love for Charles, her joy at becoming a mother, and her despair when he disappeared. She begged him to come back to take responsibility for his actions. The final letter broke their hearts. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please know I forgave you, even though you couldn't forgive yourself. Take care of our babies, Charles. They deserve better than we gave them." Ethan and Emily sat in silence, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time, they understood the pain their biological parents had endured. and the choices that had shaped their lives. They also realized that finding Charles was their next step. If he was still alive, he owed them answers. Using the information from the letters and their research, Ethan tracked down Charles's current address. He lived in a luxurious penthouse in a nearby city. With mixed feelings of anger, sadness, and hope, Ethan and Emily prepared to confront the man who had abandoned them. Little did they know their meeting would change all of their lives forever. Charles Bennett lived in a world of luxury. His penthouse overlooked the glittering lights of the city, and every corner of his home was filled with expensive furniture and artwork. But despite all the wealth, Charles felt empty inside. He had spent years building his empire, yet something always gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just loneliness or regret. It was deeper than that. It was the weight of a secret he had buried long ago. One evening, as Charles sat alone in his penthouse, his phone rang. The sound startled him. He glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number flashing. Normally, he ignored such calls, assuming they were telemarketers or scammers. But tonight, something about the timing felt different. Maybe it was the quietness of the room, or maybe it was the way the city lights reflected off the glass windows, making everything seem surreal. Whatever it was, Charles picked up the phone. "Hello?" he said cautiously. A calm but firm voice responded. "Mr. Bennett, we need to talk." The words sent a chill down Charles's spine. Who could this be? And why did they sound so serious? Before he could ask, the caller continued. "My name is Emily. I think you know why I'm calling." Charles froze. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. How could someone know? He hadn't told anyone, not even Laura, about what he had done 18 years ago. Could this really be one of the babies he had abandoned? I don't understand," Charles stammered, though deep down he already knew. Emily's voice softened slightly, but it remained steady. "You left us near Willow River, Ethan and I, we're your children." For a moment, Charles thought he might faint. This couldn't be happening. He had convinced himself that the past was buried, that no one would ever find out. Yet here was someone claiming to be one of the babies he had abandoned. Someone who knew enough to track him down. "How do you know it's me?" Charles asked, his voice trembling. He tried to sound skeptical, but the fear in his tone betrayed him. Emily didn't hesitate. She rattled off details that only someone involved in the story could possibly know. The exact date of their abandonment, the type of blanket they were wrapped in, and even the location near Willow River where they were found. Each piece of information hit Charles like a punch to the gut. There was no denying it anymore. These were his children. I don't know what to say," Charles admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He slumped back into his chair, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't felt in years. Guilt, shame, and fear swirled inside him, threatening to consume him completely. "We want answers," Emily said firmly. "We deserve to know why you did what you did." Charles wanted to explain, to justify his actions, but the words wouldn't come. How could he possibly defend abandoning his own children? Instead, he agreed to meet them in person. They arranged to meet at a cafe in Oakmont, the city where Ethan and Emily lived. As he hung up the phone, Charles felt a mix of dread and curiosity. What would these strangers, his own flesh and blood, be like? Would they hate him? Or would they give him a chance to explain? The days leading up to the meeting were agonizing for Charles. He barely slept, replaying the conversation in his head over and over again. Memories of that fateful night flooded back. The panic, the guilt, the tears he had shed as he drove away from the riverbank. He thought about Laura too, wondering if she had ever forgiven him. Had she moved on with her life? Or had she suffered because of his cowardice? Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Charles dressed carefully, choosing a dark suit that made him feel more confident. Despite his nerves, he reminded himself that he was still a successful businessman, someone used to handling difficult situations. Surely he could face this challenge, head on. When he walked into the cafe, he immediately spotted them. Ethan and Emily sat at a small table near the window, their faces illuminated by the soft afternoon light. They looked strikingly similar to Laura, with her warm eyes and gentle smile. Seeing them stirred emotions Charles hadn't expected, pride, sadness, and a strange sense of longing. Ethan stood up first, extending his hand. "You must be Charles," he said politely, though there was a hint of tension in his voice. "Yes," Charles replied, shaking Ethan's hand. Then he turned to Emily, who studied him with a piercing gaze. "And you're Emily?" She nodded but didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she gestured for him to sit down. Once he was seated, the awkward silence stretched between them. No one knew quite where to begin. Finally, Emily broke the ice. "Why did you leave us?" she asked bluntly. Her tone wasn't angry, but it was clear she wanted answers. Charles took a deep breath. "I wish I could say I had a good reason," he began slowly. "But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of responsibility, scared of failing as a father, scared of losing control of my life. I convinced myself that someone else would find you and take better care of you than I ever could." His explanation sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Ethan frowned, clearly unimpressed. "So you just dumped us by a river and hoped for the best? Did you even stop to think about what might happen to us?" Charles flinched at the accusation. "Of course I thought about it," he snapped, then immediately regretted raising his voice. Lowering his tone, he added, "I thought about it every single day, but at the time I didn't see any other option. I was young, selfish, and stupid. I made a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it ever since." Emily leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Do you remember our mother, Laura?" Mention of Laura's name brought fresh waves of guilt crashing over Charles. He nodded, his throat tightening. "Yes, she was amazing, kind, caring, strong. I loved her, but I failed her too. After you were born, I disappeared. I didn't stick around to help her through it." "And where is she now?" Ethan asked, sharply. Charles hesitated. "I don't know. I assumed she moved on, started a new life without me. But when I heard about the psychiatric facility..." His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "What psychiatric facility?" Emily pressed. Charles explained what little he knew, that Laura had been admitted to a facility outside of Willow Creek shortly after giving birth. He admitted he hadn't followed up on her condition, too consumed by his own guilt and shame to face her. Hearing this, Ethan and Emily exchanged glances. They had uncovered the same information during their investigation, but hearing it from Charles confirmed their suspicions. "We visited the facility," Emily said quietly. "Laura passed away several years ago, but before she died she wrote letters to you." Charles's eyes widened in shock. "Letters? To me?" Emily pulled a crumpled envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "Read them. Maybe then you'll understand how much pain you caused. Not just us, but her too." With trembling hands, Charles opened the envelope and began reading. The letters were filled with raw emotion, detailing Laura's love for him, her heartbreak over his disappearance, and her hopes for their children. By the end, tears streamed down Charles's face. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his actions. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Ethan and Emily watched him silently, unsure whether to believe his apology. But as the cafe grew quieter around them, a fragile understanding began to form. This wasn't going to be easy, for any of them. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was a start. After the emotional meeting at the cafe, Charles, Ethan, and Emily decided to visit the psychiatric facility where Laura had spent her final days. It was a decision made out of necessity. They needed answers, closure, and perhaps even forgiveness. Though none of them spoke much during the drive, the air between them was heavy with unspoken questions and lingering tension. When they arrived, The facility looked exactly as Ethan and Emily had described it. Old, neglected, and hauntingly quiet. The once white walls were now streaked with dirt, and the windows were either cracked or boarded up. Overgrown grass surrounded the building, giving it an abandoned feel despite the caretaker's presence. Charles hesitated before stepping out of the car, his heart pounding with dread. This was the place where Laura had lived and died without him by her side. He felt like an intruder, unworthy of being there. The caretaker greeted them warmly, though his eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. He led them inside, explaining that while the facility had closed years ago, some personal belongings of former patients had been preserved. When they reached a small storage room filled with dusty boxes, the caretaker handed them a shoebox labeled Laura Bennett. Charles flinched at the sight of her name written so plainly. It was a reminder of everything he had lost. Ethan opened the box carefully, revealing stacks of handwritten letters, photographs, and a few trinkets Laura had kept. Among the items was a locket containing 2 tiny pictures, one of Laura smiling brightly and the other of Charles looking younger and happier than he did now. Seeing it brought tears to his eyes. He realized how much she had loved him, even after everything he had done. Emily picked up one of the letters and began reading aloud. The words were filled with pain, but also hope. Laura wrote about her struggles with memory loss and trauma after giving birth, her longing for Charles to return, and her dreams for her children's future. She expressed anger at times, frustration at others, but ultimately she forgave him. Her final letter ended with these words: "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please know I forgave you, even though you couldn't forgive yourself. Take care of our babies, Charles. They deserve better than we gave them." Charles sank into a chair, overcome with emotion. He covered his face with his hands, unable to hold back the tears any longer. For years, he had convinced himself that Laura hated him, that she blamed him for ruining her life. But these letters told a different story. She had loved him until the very end, forgiving him even when he hadn't deserved it. It was a love far greater than anything he had ever shown. Ethan and Emily watched him silently, unsure how to react. They had come here seeking answers, but what they found was something deeper, a mother's unconditional love and a father's long-buried guilt. Though they still struggled to reconcile their feelings toward Charles, they couldn't deny the sincerity in his tears. Maybe, just maybe, he truly regretted what he had done. As they sifted through the rest of the box, they discovered something unexpected, a journal Laura had kept during her time at the facility. The pages were filled with sketches, poems, and reflections on her life. One entry stood out in particular. In it, Laura wrote about her dreams for Ethan and Emily. She imagined them growing up strong, kind, and full of potential. She hoped they would find happiness no matter where life took them. Reading those words, Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Despite everything, Laura had believed in them, even when she couldn't be there to see them grow. Charles noticed the change in Emily's expression and gently asked, "What is it?" She handed him the journal, pointing to the page. As he read Laura's words, his chest tightened. He realized how much he had missed, not just the chance to be a father, but the opportunity to share in Laura's hopes and dreams for their children. Guilt washed over him again, but this time it was mixed with determination. He wanted to make things right, not just for himself, but for Laura and the family they could have been. "Thank you," Charles said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "for bringing me here, for showing me this." Ethan crossed his arms, still skeptical. "It doesn't fix what you did," he said bluntly. "You can't just show up now and act like everything's okay." "I know," Charles replied honestly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself. But I want to try, to be better, to do better. If you'll let me." Emily glanced at Ethan, then back at Charles. "We've spent our whole lives wondering who we are and where we came from. Finding you, it's complicated. We don't know if we can trust you yet, but maybe we can start somewhere." Her words surprised Charles. He hadn't expected them to offer him a second chance so soon. but he understood why they were hesitant. Trust wasn't something that could be earned overnight, especially after what he had done. Still, their willingness to consider it gave him a glimmer of hope. Before leaving the facility, they asked the caretaker if they could take the items from the box. He nodded, saying it was rare for anyone to claim such belongings. As they drove away, Charles held the locket tightly in his hand, vowing silently to honor Laura's memory in every way he could. Over the next few weeks, Charles made an effort to reconnect with Ethan and Emily. He started small, sending them messages to check in or asking about their interests. At first, their responses were polite but distant. However, as time went on, they began opening up more. Emily shared some of her writing with him, explaining how storytelling helped her process difficult emotions. Ethan showed him videos of the robots he had built, describing his plans to create technology that could improve people's lives. Charles listened intently, marveling at their talents and passions. He realized how much he had missed by not being part of their lives. To make amends, he offered to support their dreams in any way he could. For Ethan, that meant funding his startup, a company focused on developing affordable robotics for underserved communities. For Emily, it meant helping her publish her first book, a collection of essays about identity, family, and resilience. Both siblings were hesitant to accept his help at first, fearing it might come with strings attached. But Charles assured them it was his way of making things right, no matter how small. Slowly but surely, a bond began to form between them. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness and doubt, but it was real. Ethan and Emily started seeing glimpses of the man Charles could have been, the father he wished he had been, and Charles, for the first time in years, felt like he was becoming someone worth respecting. One evening, as they sat together in Charles's penthouse, Emily brought up a question that had been on her mind for a while. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" she asked quietly. Charles smiled, though his eyes glistened with tears. "I think she'd be amazed. You're both incredible, talented, compassionate, and brave. She always believed in you, even when she couldn't be here to tell you herself." Ethan nodded, his usual skepticism softening. "Maybe we should visit her grave sometime together." The suggestion caught Charles off guard, but he quickly agreed. Visiting Laura's resting place felt like the right thing to do, not just for closure, but as a way to honor her memory as a family. As they planned the trip, Charles realized something important. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing because of it, and finding ways to move forward together. Though scars remained, Charles, Ethan, and Emily were beginning to heal. Together they vowed to keep Laura's spirit alive, not just in their hearts, but in the lives they chose to lead. And in doing so, they found a new sense of purpose, one rooted in love, forgiveness, and hope for the future. The day they visited Laura's grave was cool and overcast, with autumn leaves swirling gently in the breeze. Charles, Ethan, and Emily stood together at the edge of the cemetery, each carrying their own mix of emotions. For Charles, it was guilt, tempered by gratitude for Laura's forgiveness and for the chance to honor her memory alongside their children. For Ethan and Emily, it was a mixture of sadness and curiosity, as this was the first time they would truly connect with the mother they never knew. As they walked toward the gravesite, Charles carried a bouquet of white lilies, Laura's favorite flower. He had remembered this small detail from their time together so many years ago. It felt symbolic somehow, bringing something she loved to a place where they could finally say goodbye. When they reached the gravestone, they paused. The inscription was simple: Laura Bennett, a loving mother taken too soon. Below her name were the dates of her birth and death, marking a life cut tragically short. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt respectful, like a shared moment of reflection. Then Emily stepped forward, kneeling down to place her hand lightly on the cold stone. Her voice trembled as she began to speak. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "I wish I could have known you. But even though we didn't get to meet, I feel like I know you through your letters. You were brave, kind, and full of love. And I want you to know we're okay." We're doing our best. Ethan joined her, his hands tucked into his pockets. Yeah, he added, his tone quieter than usual. We've been through a lot, but we've made it this far, thanks to you, and to Patricia, the woman who raised us. She taught us how to be strong just like you did. Charles listened to their words, feeling both proud and heartbroken. These were his children, standing here honoring the woman they barely remembered. He realized how much they had endured without him, how resilient they had become despite the challenges life had thrown at them. Finally, he stepped forward, placing the lilies carefully at the base of the gravestone. Laura, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know. I'm sorry. I failed you when you needed me most, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I promise, I'll do everything I can to make things right for Ethan and Emily. They deserve better than what I gave them, and they deserve to know how much you love them. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke, but he didn't try to hide them. This wasn't a moment for pride or pretense. It was about honesty and vulnerability. For the first time in years, Charles allowed himself to fully confront the pain of losing Laura, not just as a partner, but as the mother of his children. As he finished speaking, Ethan and Emily exchanged glances, then moved closer to him. They didn't say anything, but their presence was enough to let him know they appreciated his effort. After spending some time at the gravesite, they decided to walk around the cemetery. The peaceful surroundings gave them space to talk more openly about their feelings. Emily asked Charles questions about Laura, what she was like, how they met, and what made her special. Charles answered honestly, sharing stories he hadn't thought about in decades. He described her laugh, her kindness, and the way she always saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Hearing these details helped Ethan and Emily form a clearer picture of the woman who had given them life. At one point, Ethan turned to Charles and said, You know, it's weird. I spent so long hating you for abandoning us, but now, I think I understand why you did it. That doesn't mean I agree with it, but I get it. You were scared. We all mess up sometimes. What matters is what we do after. Charles nodded, grateful for Ethan's willingness to see him as human rather than just a villain. Thank you, he said sincerely. I won't ever stop trying to make up for what I did, not just for you two, but for Laura too. She deserved better than both of us. Emily smiled faintly. Maybe none of us got the perfect family we wanted, but maybe we can build something new, something real. Her words struck a chord with everyone. Over the next few months, Charles, Ethan, and Emily worked hard to strengthen their bond. Charles continued supporting Ethan's robotics startup, attending meetings and brainstorming ideas with him. Seeing Ethan's passion for innovation reminded Charles of his own drive when he was younger, and it inspired him to reconnect with the parts of himself he had lost along the way. Meanwhile, Emily kept working on her book, pouring her heart into every chapter. Charles read drafts and offered feedback, amazed by her ability to turn pain into powerful storytelling. They also started spending holidays together, something none of them had expected. Their first Thanksgiving was awkward, but meaningful. Patricia joined them too, bringing warmth and laughter to the table. She hugged Ethan and Emily tightly, reminding them that family wasn't defined by blood alone. It was about love and connection. Charles thanked her for raising his children so well, and though Patricia initially hesitated to accept his gratitude, she eventually embraced him as part of their unconventional family. One evening, as they sat around the fireplace in Charles's penthouse, Emily brought up an idea she'd been thinking about. What if we set up a scholarship fund in Mom's name, she suggested. Something to help single moms or kids who don't have access to education. It could be our way of keeping her legacy alive. Ethan immediately supported the idea, and Charles agreed wholeheartedly. Together, they launched the Laura Bennett Memorial Fund, using Charles's resources to create opportunities for others. The project brought them even closer, giving them a shared purpose that went beyond their personal struggles. Through interviews and events promoting the fund, Ethan and Emily opened up about their journey, inspiring countless people who had faced similar hardships. As the years passed, Charles found peace in ways he never thought possible. He sold parts of his business empire, choosing to focus on philanthropy and spending more time with his children. Though scars remained from his past mistakes, he learned to live with them, not as burdens, but as reminders of how far he had come. Ethan and Emily, now successful in their respective fields, often credited their resilience to the lessons they had learned growing up. They also acknowledged Charles's role in helping them heal, even if it had taken years to trust him fully. The anniversary of Laura's passing, they returned to the cemetery as a family. This time the mood was different, not somber, but hopeful. They placed fresh flowers on her grave and shared memories of the past year, the challenges they had overcome, and the joys they had experienced. As they stood together, united by loss and love, Charles felt a sense of redemption he hadn't believed was possible. Life hadn't turned out the way any of them had imagined, but in its imperfection, they had found beauty. They weren't just survivors. They were builders of relationships, of dreams, and of a future shaped by forgiveness and hope. And in honoring Laura's memory, they had discovered not only who they were meant to be, but also the power of healing together.